Welcome to Deep Drinks Podcast, where the drinks are deep and the conversations are deeper. Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast. Today, before we get started, I have a content warning. I want to give a content warning for themes of physical and sexual abuse of children and suicide and incest and many other things. Because of the diversity of subject matter, please expect other sensitive subjects as well. I'd like to introduce our guest, Eli Yoders, who is an ex-Amish man and content creator exposing all sides of the Amish church, good and bad. Eli escaped the Amish church when he was 18 years old and spent a long time learning to forgive the people and things that hurt him in the past. Eli is now a passionate Christian, known by some as the preaching truck driver. When Eli isn't making TikToks, he is part of the team at Amish Rescue Mission, which aims to help educate Amish children between good touch and bad touch, as well as offering counseling and support for those who of the Amish church, who the Amish church has hurt in the past, also offering safe houses for those who want to leave. With that, I'd like to welcome a very special guest, Eli Yoders.
Thank you very much for having me on.
So thank you for coming on. It's you literally just got off work, and
Yes.
Just came in the door when I text you. Very excited for this interview because your story is absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to learn more about the Amish. And also, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them anytime throughout, and we'll try to get to them. We're going to treat the stream as a bit of a casual stream, as if we're two friends catching up at a bar drinking some Mountain Dew. That's what we're drinking, isn't it? So, do you have a story behind this drink?
Yes, yeah. I mean, growing up in the Amish, we were not allowed to have those worldly kind of drinks, and we were not supposed to have a lot of sugary items, candy and soda pop. And so we got our hands on one day from a non-Amish friend that stopped by, and it was just one can. It was not a bottle like this, but it was like a short metal can. And I remember Mom was saying, hey, you got to really take it easy and make sure you share with all your brothers. Now, this is one can, and there's 10 of us kids, and we're passing this thing around. And I remember just taking a small sip before I passed it around. And I was hoping it would make it back to me, because I would call it that sweet English aroma.
That's awesome. So, and then when you left, you got addicted to it. Is that right? Pretty much?
Yes. Yeah. We actually, a few times we actually had what it was called a Mountain Dew party, where we would just, we drink Mountain Dew and just chat with one another. And
that's so good. So but I guess before we jump into your story, maybe you could educate myself and the audience, like, what is the Amish and what's the difference maybe between new and old order Amish? Can you give us like a rundown of what is the Amish?
Yeah, well, the Amish is a religious group, and they really actually only existed 350 years in America, but because when they came over from Switzerland, they were called the Anabaptists. And then off of the Anabaptists was a group called Mennonites. And there was a man named Menno Simmons, and the Mennonites are named after him. So thirdly came the Amish, because there was a man by the name of Jacob Ammon that really wanted to make it his own thing. He was kind of wanting to reject his own people and actually shun some of his own family and his parents, and got a group together to make it his own. So Jacob Ammon, Amish, is named after Ammon, and that is how the Amish were birthed. And since then, there has been just hundreds and hundreds of different splits, because they have grown so much in size, and they triple every 20 years. They triple because of their large families. So because of the disagreements, and because they are establishing their own rules, so usually they don't get along with all the rules as they get bigger and bigger and more people are in the communities. So that is why they have the splits, and they totally believe in Jacob Ammon's articles of faith. Now, those articles of faith were written with a lot of scripture but rules. It was works based with a lot of rules they believe that you should follow, and then separate yourselves from the world. They believe that you should not have anything to do with any other people, and separate yourselves and be alone. And then God would be pleased if you have those kind of rules and are separate from the world. And that's really what they do. It's a very strong religion, and some people would call it a cult because they fit the definition of a cult because of the control that they have, especially the old order. I come from a very old order conservative group where they very much taught us that if you are born and raised Amish, there's no way you could ever get to heaven and please God if you don't remain Amish for the rest of your life, especially since God allowed you to be born Amish.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting. I wonder, so do they have like, do they consider the Bible as the authority, like the word of God, or do they have other texts as well that they use?
They will always answer outsiders back to say, yes, we do use the Bible. The Bible is our final authority. One thing most people don't know is those articles of faith that I mentioned earlier that was written by Jacob Ammon. And so that is actually number one over the Bible. They do cherry pick the Bible. I call it cherry picking because they do base some of it on scripture, but they believe that if you follow those articles of faith, and then they use the 10 commandment that says honor your father and your mother. So they're very big on honoring your forefathers. So since Jacob Ammon passed that down, they believe you must respect and honor those forefathers and continue in those rules in order to get to heaven. So they use some Bible, but they do definitely not use just the Bible and make it their final authority because they have other things they add on to it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Um, all right. So how does like the Amish church differ from like and just a regular Christian church? Like I know that you don't use electricity, or you do maybe, but I don't. What does the Amish in general? I know that there are different sects, but is it a rejection of like worldly things past a certain date, or is it?
Yes, yeah, they actually reject all electricity. They don't have any vehicles. They have horse-drawn buggies, carriages, and they believe you should be completely opposite. Now, back when they first formed, obviously there was no electricity, there was no cars, but they still separated themselves and wouldn't do the things that the rest of the world would do. They still made rules and guidelines to be separate from the rest of the people and what they were doing. Let's say they were smoking tobacco or chewing tobacco. They just wouldn't do those things because they said that's what the worldly people do. So as of today, they just reject all modern day technology. They say the phones, especially the smartphones, they really say that that is the most worldly thing you could have is a computer or a smartphone. So anybody that does get busted with those type of things, that's usually the most harsh punishment. Up to like 6 to 8 weeks, they can put you in the ban, which is a shunning period in the Amish. But they very much believe that as long as they're not accepting the electricity, the television, the smartphone, the cars, all of those things, they believe if they reject all of those things, then they're not making themselves part of the world.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so is there an emphasis on being part of the world morally, or is it mainly just like physical objects? Like obviously, you won't see an Amish person at a strip club or something because that or whatever. But like do they? Because I know that when I was involved in church that they had it was a distinct line between uh being of the world, but it was always about morality. It wasn't, and it didn't have to do with like we had everything, the gadgets and everything, and in fact we probably had more tech than the average average person. But it was always about morality. Is it like that with the Amish as well, or is it just mainly to do with technology?
uh Mainly the physical things, that's why they have
Okay.
so many rules, because they very much focus on the physical things, the things you can see with your eyeball. They say the phone's bad, all these things are bad. Now they do talk about, the morals. They believe that obviously you shouldn't have any sexual immorality. They do not allow divorce. All of those things are like an unforgivable sin if you get a divorce, stuff like that. So they do preach against that. But as far as churches that are not Amish, it's quite different, because the old order Amish where I come from, they don't have church buildings. They actually hold their church services in their own personal homes. They move from one house to another. They move around. They don't believe it's even biblical to have a building on a Sunday or a certain day to go worship.
Interesting. Aunt Jer asked a question, and someone in the chat, they asked a question, do they use buttons or zippers?
That depends on from one community to another. Again, that they split off, they always go their own way. And every time there's a split, they make their own rules. Now, we did have buttons in our particular group, but I do know some
Oh,
very old order
scandalous.
conservative groups that don't.
Okay. Wow, no buttons. No button. What about zippers in your group?
No, zippers were absolutely forbidden. They said that since all of the world would use zippers because that was a common thing, and they said there was no way that you could please God and get into heaven if you have any zipper on a shirt or a pants or even a bag. They can't even have a bag with a zipper on it.
Wow. Okay. Do they I'm just picking your brain now. I know we want to get into your story, but I'm just fascinated by this. Do you does the Amish church teach that um that like about the tribulation or the end times, or that Jesus is going to return soon, those type of things, or is that not something that's not taught?
They do teach that Jesus is going to come soon. They do believe that. They do also teach that the end is near. They talk a lot about that. But as far as Revelation and like the tribulation and stuff like that, they don't really go into detail. They say those things are not for us to know yet. But they do teach a lot about Revelation 13. They go into Revelation and they talk a lot about the beast and this whole one world system and how the mark of the beast and they say, tattoos, numbers play into that. They use a lot of, again, I'll go back to the physical things you can see. They really look at the things they can see with their eyeball, like tattoos. And we were not allowed to have social security numbers, which is what in America is when you start paying taxes and that's your identity. And so they don't even allow those social security numbers or even birth certificate, anything with a code or a number, because they immediately believe that that is part of the beast system. So I'd say out of the entire book of Revelation in the Bible, they cherry pick that chapter of 13 quite a bit. And even the smartphone that I'm talking on with you right now, they would say that this smartphone is also part of the mark of the beast.
Right. Okay. Interesting. What, and this is probably my last question, just before we get into your story, but what is the translation of the Bible that is used for in the Amish?
They actually force, this is the old order Amish. I know some of the more new order Amish that kind of branched off, they started using English written Bibles, but handed down from Jacob Ammon was a German translation. And the one that we had was the 1522 Martin Luther version. And they believed,
Okay.
since the 12 articles of faith were written off of the Martin Luther 1522 version, that is why they strictly enforce that. In my particular Amish church, they actually strictly forbid using any English written Bible. They say that any other translation outside of that is being used by the devil to try to deceive them away from the truth. So they will actually be willing to cut any other Bible up and burn them. They have no problem with that because they believe that it's demonic and of the devil.
Wow.
So yeah, I actually got a video here soon that I'm going to share on my social media where one of us, our former Amish buddies, actually was on a construction site and caught some of the Amish actually taking cases and cases of Bibles and cutting them up and burning them because they were not the Martin Luther Bible.
Wow. So what would happen if you had like older manuscripts that weren't in German, that were in written in Greek? Would they be more authoritative, even though they were what was used to translate into the German? Or is that seen as...
To answer that question, I will tell you my personal experience. I was trying to make a case with the Amish bishop in my community not long ago when I visited him. And I was going into like the Hebrew and Greek texts way before the Amish ever existed. And I didn't get very far into that conversation. And he said, I will not allow the devil to use you to try to persuade me away from the truth. They usually cut you, especially the very old order conservative Amish. They will cut you off. They will put the hammer down. And I tried to then just kind of smile and still be friendly with him just to see if I can continue talking. But as soon as I started talking about how I put my faith in Christ because of what the Bible says, he said, get off of my property. So even if you go into those earlier texts, they just want nothing, especially the strict ones. The New Order
Yeah.
Amish, I'm just blessed to see that they're starting to be more open. But these Old Order, I'm telling you, they are just they're a group that they believe they are right and everybody else is wrong, and therefore you really cannot really reason with them.
Right. Okay. Wow. That's very interesting. So, okay, that gives everyone a good update and gives me a good update of what the Amish are. Like broadly, of course, we're not talking about all Amish. But could you tell us a little bit about your story growing up in Kenton, Ohio?
Yeah. Kenton, Ohio was formed in the 1950s, early 1950s. And my grandfather was actually the very first family to move in. He became the bishop, and he was one of the most, they say still today, that he was one of the most staunch religious Amish bishops known in America because of his stance on standing firm. The first rules that he made, those can never be changed. He was standing firm on those. If anything changed, he would get more strict rather than ever becoming more lenient. So one thing that stands out to me in my community is kind of like what I call a generational curse. There's many things that happen for many generations, like physical abuse. I saw a lot of physical abuse on me and my brothers, my siblings, and also my mother. I saw my mother sometimes being strangled where she was blue in the face, wasn't moving. And that was something that I was able to find out through my grandma, which is my dad's mom. She left the Amish when my dad was just a little kid. And I heard nothing but bad things about her. But when I left the Amish, I was on a desperate search to find her. And within 2 years, I found her in the state of Florida. And when I found her, that's when I got a good insight of why my dad was the way he was, because he also was treated that way. So what stands out to me is there was many generations where these things were happening. Even depression. Depression was very rampant, and anger and rage and all of those things, because they really didn't get the proper help. They didn't have those like outside counseling and rehab places where they would allow you to go to get help if you have these issues. So I saw a lot of that stuff growing up in my community, not just in my family, but other families as well. But they didn't believe in getting help from the worldly people. They thought those are the people that are of the world, so you shouldn't go call them. Even if there's a crime, you're not supposed to call the law, call the police, because those are the worldly bad people. So they really just kind of kept it in the church. So now I'd say that's why my community had much more bad stuff that I saw growing up than maybe some of the other Amish communities.
Yeah, I see that's a big thing in a lot of churches actually, where because if you consider yourself, if you consider your like your group as like the moral authority, like at least you're the ones who are doing the right thing, and then you of course you look down at like the police and stuff because they're not in the same group as you. So it's actually quite an easy way to think that, and of course it's quite easy to think that, I can see, and being part of a really recluse society like the Amish, it would be I can see how that would become a big problem, or yeah. So, but you grew up in a large family, is that right? Like many brothers and sisters, and
yeah, in my family there was 10 of us, but that was kind of low. The average was usually around 15. And my grandfather, my dad's dad, actually came from a family of 20 kids. And
wow.
all 20 kids ended up with 10 plus kids. So the one day when I was trying to add everything up, I realized pretty quickly that I had over 3,000 second and third cousins. And when it came down to just first cousins, I actually had 385 first cousins.
That's so you could almost visit a new one every day of the week, every day of the year, and it would almost take you a year to get through all of them, of your first cousins.
There was enough of us former Amish now where we decided to have a Yoder reunion on my side of the family. And I remember we were laughing and just kind of got a kick out of it, because when we got there and we tried to get the word out on social media, we didn't realize that many had left the Amish, but just the former Amish that had left the Amish, there was 150 of us.
That's so wow, that's amazing. So I remember you mentioned on one of your live streams that the a part of, I guess, your testimony starts with your grandmother actually leaving the Amish. So can you explain how that's relevant to your story?
Yes, yeah. My grandmother, she left the Amish obviously before I was born. My dad was still very young. And so the reason I went in search of her is because I wanted to hear, I'm a type of person, I want to hear both sides of the story, not just one. So
Yeah.
growing up, if somebody leaves the Amish culture, the Amish faith, they are looked at as given over to Satan. They're now of the world, that they can't please God. They're not going to go to heaven. So for that reason, I heard nothing but bad things about my grandmother. It was so negative. You know, she gave herself over to the devil and she was bad to my grandpa. Just all of those stories. So when I found her, I found it very interesting to listen to her side of the story and how there was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, and there was so many things happening where she wanted to say something to the church. And in the Amish religion, they do not give the women any voice. The women are silenced in the church. They are not to speak in the church. You must consult your husband, the man, at home. And so when she tried to say something to the church about this abuse from my grandpa, then they just didn't believe her. They would have believed her if he would have confessed like he's supposed to. But she was telling me how he would deny all of those things. You know, they get a maid when a baby's born. So when my dad was born, she would tell me how their niece came over to be the maid to help out at the time because of the newborn. And then she found him doing a sexual act with the niece. So now you're talking about incest. So she tried to bring that up to the church. And he won in that case. He said, no, she's making this up. She's unruly. She's a bad wife. And so the Amish got to where they actually punished her for lying. They was not buying her side of the story. So she got to the point where she was so upset and so angry. She says, I'm not going to stay here and keep putting up with this. Very few women would ever be bold enough to do what my grandmother did, and that is just put an end to it. And she got a hold of some outside people outside the Amish community and just secretly planned to leave. And that is another thing that my dad obviously struggled with growing up, because he was very little. He couldn't understand why mom just disappeared, but she just took off and vanished into thin air, and nobody knew what happened. But the church obviously realized pretty quickly that she had left because she was not going to tolerate this stuff. But then they definitely blamed her. They said, oh, now she's definitely guilty. She's definitely running from her problem. She don't want to get caught. And so they obviously used that as she is the guilty one, and that's why she left the Amish and ran away.
Yeah, right. Because she could never been seen as as like righteous leaving that situation because she's leaving the Amish.
Right.
So that sent your dad into like a depression, right? And and then he kind of continued the circle of abuse for a while.
Yeah, my grandfather actually, and I was so blessed to have known this information when I left the Amish, because growing up Amish, I always saw my grandpa being single, but he always had this chiropractic care that he did. And every time we were there and he had a patient, it was always a woman. And I always looked back and I thought, why did he always have women only? Like he was always, you know, wanting to look up their dresses, and just, he was what I would now call as a sexual predator, to be honest with you, because he was just doing this practice to try to fulfill his own sexual desires. And after speaking to grandma, that is when it started all making sense. Now, my dad, he had obviously been beaten as well physically, and he was trying to make sense of some of that as well. So my dad growing up was doing the same thing to us. You know, we saw some pretty severe physical abuse, but my father was probably the most depressed person I've ever known on the face of this earth, because he was hurting in here. He was in pain, trying to figure everything out. He was trying to sort everything out. So he actually, the earliest memories I have, I remember my dad being excommunicated from the Amish church because he went to alcohol to try to numb the pain, the stuff that he was dealing with. So his depression and his alcohol and everything, the church didn't help him through that. They started really kind of excommunicating him for long periods of time. And they said, you know, you just don't want to repent. You're not turning from the alcohol. You're not turning from, you know, being depressed. And he had all these problems, but they didn't know how to help him.
Yeah. And is there anything they could do in there? Like, obviously, I don't know what your perspective on depression is, but um, how could the Amish help in that situation? Like what could they have done anything? Like, what was their advice?
Well, usually in situations like that, they sit down and they try to just fellowship and talk and say, "Hey, we're here to listen." They do kind of the counselor mentality, I should say, but it's not professional counseling. It's not to where they put you on a medication and try to help you through that depression and try to get a better understanding. Maybe get together and pray for you. Those things were not happening, and so by adding weeks and weeks and weeks of punishment and putting him in the ban actually drove my dad even more crazy. He went even into more deeper alcoholism. So I would probably say half of the time growing up in my Amish home, my dad he was shunned and he had to eat separately. We always saw dad like this little table over in the corner of the kitchen where he was eating separately because when you're baptized as a church member and you break the rules, like drinking alcohol, like my dad was, the other baptized church members, like my mother, she could not eat at the same table. She can't hand him something. She can't hand him a
Uh,
fork or a plate or anything like that. So
do not
my
even
mom,
eat with someone who calls himself
mhm,
a believer but lives. Yeah, yeah,
yes.
that's
Yeah,
where it
she
comes
was
from.
very much following the church rules right to a T because her dad, my grandpa, was the bishop. So she very much wanted to please her daddy, the bishop.
Of course, of course. Uh, so eventually, you told this story. I wonder if you be happy to talk about it. But you talked about this time with Alvin, your brother, and when you were on top of a silo, um, and your father was beating him with a 2x4. Is it right?
Yes, yeah. We there's many different uh, times where I saw my dad physically beating on one of my siblings, but that one there was probably the one that stood out. I could never get that out of my head because I was up in the silo trying to feed the cows, throw some silage down, and we had just filled it up almost all the way to the rim. So I'm way up at the top of this thing, and it was nothing new to really hear Dad yelling and one of my brothers yelling, and they're back and forth, and then hearing Dad beating them, and then hearing them crying. But this particular day, I could hear the sound of my brother Alvin kind of the breath went out of him, like that groan where this is not normal. So I
Mm.
look over the side of the silo and I could see him. My father obviously had been drinking, and he had a 2x4 in his hand, and he was just wailing on him. And what stood out to me is it almost seemed like he was wanting to kill him or something, like an animal, just whacking him right over the head. And I remember I just had to do something. So I went flying down the silo so fast. I mean, within seconds, I was at the bottom. So I would yell really loud to try to distract my father. Now that would be a bad thing normally because I knew he would chase me, and he did. But it was worth it because I wanted him to turn on to me so that hopefully I can save my brother Alvin's life, which I did. He
Mm.
was unconscious for a while. He was hurt pretty bad, but I was able to distract my father, and then he came running after me, and I went up into the hayloft in the barn and was able to hide somewhere and got away from him.
Yeah, I know that when I was listening to your story, it actually brought back some stuff for me because when I was younger, my mum was in an abusive relationship for a little while, and she used to get beaten up a lot. And I remember there was a specific night that it just like I woke up from it and I could tell it was different. And anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I escaped. I jumped out the window and we went to a neighbor's house at like 2 in the morning and called the police and stuff. But um, I know that feeling of like, they're arguing, like just it is, another argument. Okay, like for me, I was like, all right, I'll roll over, go back to sleep, like try and sleep through it or whatever. But then there was that moment of like, no, this feels different. This feels like I need to intervene here,
Yeah.
and to get help. I know that, and that really touched me when I heard that part of your story because I could relate to it. Obviously, not
Mm-hmm.
to the same degree, but so you would have sorry, you would have grew up you would have grown up, sorry, fearing your father a lot. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially my younger years, we feared him. All of not just me, but all of my brothers. We feared him to the point where we would take a different route around the barn or not take the same path because, well, we never really knew when he would snap, and especially when he was drinking, we would avoid him the best we could because we just never knew what was going to happen. And especially mom, we want to defend mom sometimes, but we were too young until we got up in our teenage years. We couldn't really do anything. And here's another thing that I want to point out. If we would have just known that you could call the law, we're in a secretive little Amish religion, and you don't know that there is this law enforcement, the police officers that we viewed them as dangerous, bad people because of what we were taught. And if we would have known, hey, we could run to the outside people and call 911 and dad would get arrested. We didn't know that at a young age. So we're
Hmm.
sitting there, we're believing that the Amish lifestyle is what is right because that's what we were taught. So, it was up to the church to try to do something about it. And obviously they didn't have the right resources in place to help him. So it got to the where it just spiraled out of control, where the abuse on mom was so bad that sometimes I thought she was dead. I mean, she was unconscious. I don't know how many times. One time she actually locked herself into the bedroom and he couldn't get in and she used the deadbolt. And then he came in the house and he had the sledgehammer in his hand. And then he just beat the door down. Everything broke to pieces and he still went in there and dragged her out of there. So it was just no stopping him. There was like no limits. But when we did get older up into the teenage years, there was a few times where we used clubs, like four or five of us boys used clubs and bats and broom handles. And we were able to, one night when he was very drunk, we stopped him from beating mom. We actually beat him down to where he wasn't moving.
Right. What a absolutely harsh living situation to grow up in. That's brutal. So it makes sense. You mentioned actually that if you probably still be Amish if you grew up in a loving, you know, environment. Are you glad though that you're not Amish? Are you happy that that you're out and that you can drink Mountain Dew and things like that?
Yes, yeah. I enjoy my freedom. I have never regretted leaving. I do believe it would have been much better. I probably would not have been tempted to leave the Amish if it would have been in a different environment, different family, maybe different Amish community with less rules. But I still believe the way I am. I think because I'm not very good at letting people have power and control over me and have rules in place. So I think I probably still would have left even in a different community so I could have the Mountain Dew.
It's all about the Mountain Dew. Uh, so, at what stage did you start thinking like, I can't do this? I'm going to leave the Amish church. And what was like? Did you think at that time that you were leaving your family as well, or like, what is that? What is that process mentally like?
I knew I wanted to leave as early as 12. That I remember having thoughts of wanting to eliminate myself from this family and this life at age 12. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know how I would ever even do that. But as the years played out and I turned into 15, 16 years old, then I was ready to attempt something. Even though I was taught that you would just go to hell, there's no way God would be happy with you. You could never make it to heaven if you left the Amish. I still was at the point where I thought, well, hell would certainly be better than what I'm going through here. So at age 16, I tried to leave and I got caught. So I got beat severely for that because I attempted to leave. And nobody from the outside really wanted to help because I was underage. I was a juvenile. I wasn't 18 yet. So at one point, and I knew I wanted to leave. I just felt like it was impossible now to ever leave. So at one point, I knew I was going to get beat for this, but I actually took my rifle and I went back into a wooded area. We had a nice, large wooded area, two different woods that we had, and I just went in the middle and make myself a makeshift tent with some boards and cut down some trees, and I had my dog with me. And I would hunt and live off the land. I had a creek there to drink water, and I could shoot and kill my own animals and survive. And I did that for about 2 weeks. That was my happiest time, all alone, nobody yelling at me, nobody beating on me. I had food, I had water. I was at peace all by myself. That might sound lonely to some people, but that was my happy moment. That was my peace by just being alone and having nobody bothering me. And I was able to survive and I was happy. But I knew whenever I do go back home, it was going to be severe. I probably wasn't going to be able to sit for a month because I'm going to get beat. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow. How old were you when you ran off into the woods to do that?
That was right when I attempted at 16 to try and run away. So I believe that it's either 15 or 16, because I was right at the time where I felt almost like trapped. Like there's just no way
Mm.
now I would be able to leave. So I just wanted to I thought a couple weeks in the middle of the woods away from everybody would be worth a beating. I just wanted peace for a couple weeks. And then when they find out that I had tried to escape or wherever I was at, then I would just take the discipline and deal with it. And that's why I did that. Because I just really didn't think, I knew I had to wait until I was 18, because I had some non-Amish friends that said, hey, when you turn 18, then I can legally give you a home by law. I can take you in. So I'm like, oh, wow, man, that's so far away. And, I just felt like, man, I want to leave now. And I just want to escape all of this. And so, yeah, I was a wreck for a while, just trying to figure out how I could just eliminate everything.
Wow. That must have been. How far into the woods did you go when you left that
I
time?
was pretty good. I was like an Indian. I could go back into the woods very far, and I had no fear. I knew how to survive. I would say in about 100-acre woods, I was probably about center. I was way deep in there.
Wow. Is there anything left there? Like, if you went back there, could you like find the spot that you stayed, or is it not really?
I used to go back and find the spot many a different times, even after that, because I used to. That became my comfort zone. Like
Yeah.
in the past, after that, I would go revisit that area when I saw where I had my boards and it had the leaves for when if it rained or whatever, and that became like, if I was depressed, if I was going through some things, instead of running to a human for comfort, that was my spot. That's where I would go.
Wow, that's actually. I'd love to see if you ever make it back out there again. That's a great TikTok idea. I'd love to watch that TikTok. Which reminds me, I will promote it later. But you have an amazing TikTok that we answer every which question. So so when you actually decided to be, what happened when you actually decided to leave when you were 18? How did that come about?
Well, obviously, in my particular group of conservative, old order Amish, you can't not make that known, because some of the Amish in America have a season where you can go explore the world. In the very old order, we don't have that option. So you're told, and if they catch you, there's some pretty harsh consequences. They'll ship you off even to other Amish communities that they're affiliated with, and they'll make you sometimes for a long period of time, 6 months to a year, where they try to reprogram your thinking if you got caught trying to escape or leave the Amish faith into the world. So I knew for that very reason that I better not make it known. So I would continually try to speak to some of my non-Amish friends, which we call everybody else English that is outside the Amish. So my English friends were willing to help me, and they told me, and I trusted them, that when I turned 18, that they would help me and pick me up and get me out of there. So I obviously planned all of this completely secret, and I guess some of the signs, I guess I didn't know I was doing it, but mom could tell that moms know everything. Like she knew that I was different. I was acting a little different, I guess is what she said. So I was laying there that morning before I left, and I had just turned 18, and she came up. I had my head buried underneath the covers, and my Amish mother just told me, she said, if you are leaving and giving yourself over to the world, she says, you are not welcomed out here for any of the other siblings to see you in the worldly clothing. She says, if you do come visit, you can, but you have to have your Amish clothes on. And you got to have a hat on to cover up, worldly haircut and all of that. And she said, you cannot drive a vehicle, a worldly car in here. You must park it somewhere and walk. So she put some rules in place, thinking that I was leaving. And I remember thinking, how does she know that? Something triggered her off, where it tipped her off, where I might not have been acting right. She could see, like moms just know that. But I remember how surprised I was, because nobody had asked me if I was even leaving at that time. But I had secretly planned it. And of course I was 18, and I knew that my English friends told me that at age 18, by law, I can make my own decisions. I can speak for myself, because the Amish adult is not until 21. We couldn't have our own money until we were 21. You don't get married until you're 21. So I started learning that I have rights at age 18 if I escape and get out of the Amish. So I knew that they would be willing to pick me up, and that's what happened. So they picked me up, and I left. And of course, I waited quite a while before I went out because I knew there was rules. I had to wear my Amish clothes, so I waited a while before I went back out to visit anyway.
Wow. I've got sorry, I've got a couple of questions. One from D. How did you meet the communities with English friends? How did you meet people and communicate with his English friends?
Amish, all Amish, no matter what order they are, they all do business with outsiders. They do construction for them. They buy, sell, trade. They're always doing business. We milked a lot of cows, and we would sell a lot of that milk to the non-Amish milk stations to make cheese. So there was constantly English folks around us. So I was able to make friends with a couple of them. There was also a pallet factory where they made wooden pallets just right next to our Amish farm. So there's where I met my buddy that was willing to help me leave the Amish, because I would always go and speak with him about my problems and let him know when I was in upper teenage years. And that's how I really was able to escape, because if it wasn't for anybody willing outside the Amish to help me and plan my escape, there was just no way and that's also one of the reasons why there's very few women that leave out of my Amish community, because the women are not out in the workforce. The women are in the house, they're cooking, they're cleaning. All of our clothes were homemade. They made all of our clothes. And so cooking, canning, the vegetables, gardening, all of that stuff. So the women really don't have that opportunity if they ever had thoughts of maybe leaving. And that's why my community, I'd say there's over 100 guys now left and one female so far.
Wow. Did your community practice Rumspringa? I think
that's that season that I mentioned earlier. That is, the Rumspringa is the German word for running around. It's running around season. From the Amish that practice that usually do that from about age 16 through 18. And my Amish community does not even fellowship or have anything to do with those Amish that practice that, because they say, why would you let your youngsters go experience the world, the evil people? Because you got to protect the Amish religion. So my group would not allow that, but that's what Rumspringa is. It's a season of going out and basically sowing your wild oats and party and experience the world.
Yeah, I always found that idea funny, because it's kind of like it's like sinning, I guess, for a little while. Like that just seems funny, weird to me. Our marriage is arranged.
No, the marriages are not arranged, but in my group, we had to stay in our church, in our Amish community. You had to stay in that group. Now, if there are other churches that we were affiliated with the similar rules, ordinances, you could date somebody and get married with some other church that has the same rules, the same church ordinance, but they didn't want you to go outside of that. So they didn't necessarily arrange and say, hey, you got to, this is the woman for you. You got to marry this one. It wasn't like that, but they wanted you to stay in that church district, even if it was your cousin. In my particular group, you could marry a cousin.
That was going to be my next question. Is there, you can marry cousins? Was it frowned upon, or was it just totally a-okay?
No, because of their small communities where you're related to mostly everybody, they're completely fine with it. Usually second cousins is what they want you to do, but several times it was first cousins. My own twin brother, he married his wife and she never had to change her last name. It was Yoder.
Okay. Is there, I'm not sure about this, but I'm not sure, but is there any chance of deformed births with with having babies with your cousin? Is there chances of that?
It was actually very, very rare, to be honest with you. In my community, I remember of 2 Down syndrome, mentally challenged, where you would think it would be higher because of that kind of whatever you want to call it, inbreeding or whatever. So there's actually very, very little that I saw. I only remember 2 the entire time I was growing up until I left the Amish at 18. And they, of course, they took care of those themselves in the Amish homes until they passed away. The one didn't live past like 20 years old, I don't think.
My wife and I are currently we went through IVF and we're about to have our first baby, and just learning so much about birth and labor and everything. I'm curious, what is a labor like for someone in your old Amish community? Do you guys go to a hospital or is it all at home?
Yeah, it's all at home. All 10 of us siblings were all born at home naturally. We never went to a single hospital. Some of the other Amish groups in the state of Ohio have went to hospitals. They're more open to that. But I can tell you that in my group, very old order, it really sunk in when I went out to the Amish cemetery and saw all of those stones that had the couple's names, the married couple's names, and then it said the name of the stillborn baby, stillborn, 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 all the way down through there. And that showed me why they say you should always trust God and give it to God. And if the newborn baby don't live, it was God's will, and they just go bury it. So it's all natural, all at home. Never went to the. In my family, my mom, there's two sets of twins. My mom never knew when it was twins. She never knew if it was a boy or a girl until birth. And they do have midwives, what is called a midwife, where they come over and they help my father deliver. They're more educated. They've done it for a while, and they try to educate other women that are married. And they're the only ones that are allowed to participate in that, because anybody that is not married is not supposed to have any sex education. They're not supposed to know any of those things, where babies even come from.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's sad about the stillbirths and that. But so back to you first leaving the Amish. Do you remember the day that you actually left?
Oh yeah, I remember that. I can never forget that day. It was October
Okay.
11, 1998, because that was the day of freedom.
Well, so what? Yeah, tell us about that. Like, what was that like?
Well, my heart was beating. I was very nervous because I didn't want nothing to go wrong. And everybody was supposed to be going to church, and I was trying to get up real early. I wanted to escape. And I started wondering, is my English friend really going to show up? And I knew I couldn't take a bunch of possessions. I just wanted to get my immediate belongings, something I can carry just in a bag. And sure enough, he was right on time. He parked down the road from our Amish farm, and I went running. I remember the freedom I felt as I was leaving, and I wanted to look back. It was so weird, because I was like, why am I not looking back? Why am I not missing my family, my home? I could not look back. I was running to freedom. And when I got to that vehicle, he turned the music on, and I kicked back, and I just felt the freedom. And it was never, I never looked back. It was a day of freedom that I'll never forget. The feeling, to just be free. And it was just so comforting. And I couldn't thank him enough that he actually did show up and pick me up. So it was an awesome day. The rest of them went to church because it was on a Sunday where they would go to church, and the rest of them all went to church. But 2 weeks before I was going to leave, I was actually supposed to get baptized in the Amish church, where you would make the oath to follow the rules the rest of your life. That oath is considered more severe of an oath than a marriage oath. But
Right.
I rode a bicycle and got busted. Our community was not allowed to have even a bicycle, because that is way too worldly. So I took the neighbor's bike that didn't even have rubber tires on it. This thing was a raggedy old bicycle, and I got busted with this thing, and therefore I disqualified for Amish baptism. And that's really where I knew I'm not going to tolerate this. I mean, if a bike is too, but because the other Amish in our not far from us had bikes, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're telling me that I can't please God? It's way too worldly to have a bike, and I can't get baptized. But Amish just up the road, they have bicycles, so it just didn't make any sense.
Wow. So, oh, wow. So, I can just. Do you remember what music was playing when you were in the car, in the radio, when you were
Yeah,
first leaving?
yeah. There was a George Jones song on, and after that, he was just flipping through some of the channels. Garth Brooks country. I'm still a big country fan, but not. I would say it was only just days when I was out. I heard this. It's mainly for girls, for kids, and it was called the Spice Girls.
Oh
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
And I remember hearing that song, and I mean, it just tickled my Amish ears. I loved it.
Yeah, when I was growing up, that was everyone in my school loved the Spice Girls, and I think it was one of my first bands I ever liked, the Spice Girls. Yeah, they're good stuff. They're good stuff. Um, I got a few more questions. D is just coming in with the questions. Could women cut their hair or shave?
No, no. In our group of Amish, we were taught that you should always remain the way you are. That's why the women were not allowed to shave at all. Uh, the hair cutting was something that they have had probably since Jacob Almond first started the Amish. The women could not cut their hair whatsoever. That is
Wow.
something that had to be untouched. And then when they put the caps on, they roll it up into a bun and then they put the cap over that. But if any woman, it was so severe, if any woman got caught even touching their hair, cutting their hair, tampering with it, that was such an unholy thing. That was probably the worst punishment a woman can get is if they cut their hair. They just wasn't allowed to touch their hair at all.
Wow. So their whole life they grow hair. How long does their hair get? Does it
When I
eventually?
just before I left the Amish, my sister, she was 12 years old, my oldest sister, and her hair went all the way to her ankles.
Wow. Wow. And so, and n- no one can shave their legs or their armpits or anything like that. It's just wow.
No.
Okay. That's interesting. What holidays do they celebrate?
They have different holidays, some holidays of their own. Christmas is something that stands out to me because we're like almost to Christmas now, but they didn't believe that December 25 would be the birthday of Jesus. So they believed it was 2 weeks later on January 6th. And that is when they would celebrate Jesus' birthday, but it was no presents, it was no trees, no lights, no Santa Claus. It was fasting. Now you wouldn't think there'd be a lot of food involved, but they did fasting and they did this German prayer book that they have. It's called the Ashbund. I remember that. And then they would literally do like rituals like that, where they would fast for a whole day. And that's kind of how they celebrated that. They did have Thanksgiving where they had meals, they had some food. So that was very similar. They did Easter. They believed that was obviously the resurrection when Jesus rose from the grave. So they did also celebrate Easter. But as far as 4th of July, Independence Day, Labor Day, all of they thought those were all pagan. They didn't do anything for those.
Right. And do the Amish have a traditional perspective of heaven and hell, as in eternal paradise and eternal punishment?
Yes, yes, they do
Okay.
believe that there is a hell and there is a heaven, and they believe that, and it depends on which group, of course. My group believes that the only way Jesus would open the door, maybe they're not even sure of their salvation. They believe there's the only chance that you might get in through Christ is if you're Amish first and through that church. So, but they do preach that there is a heaven and that there is a hell that is eternity and will never end.
Right. Okay. Interesting. You talked about seeing your father with your diary. What can you talk about that a little bit? Because you were writing in your diary, is that right? Before you left?
Yes, yes. There was this non-Amish lady that used to come out during the holidays, and we didn't want to be rude, so we would receive whatever they would give us. And one of them allowed us to have
My
that. And I started writing down a lot, kind of like I said earlier about the woods when I would just escape and go to my happy place. I started realizing, wow, I can write my daily thoughts in this thing and just like pour it right onto these pages. And that's what I started doing for roughly 2.5 years that I did this before I left the Amish. So I'm just writing everything. When I'm angry, when I'm mad, I'm using German cuss words, and I'm angry at dad this day, and mom said this day, and I got spanked and beat because my brother did this, and they couldn't prove who it was. And I mean, all of those things, all my pains, my hurts was poured out into these pages. So when I left the Amish, I went down to work with my buddy that picked me up, which worked at that pallet place, and I'm working there at this pallet place with already non-Amish clothes on, and it was the day after I left, and my dad came walking down there, and I just remember the gut feeling that I had when my father is standing there with his hand open and he had my diary in his hand. I was like, oh no, I should have took that. But I know God didn't want me to take that. He wanted my family to see what was in that diary. And I remember my dad couldn't hold back his tears. He started crying, and I just looked at him like, oh, I wish he didn't see all that bad stuff I wrote about him, but he needed to read it. He
Mm.
needed to see it, and he did. And he just came up and he just said, I know why you left the Amish, because I was such a bad dad. And I said, no, Dad. I said, the church, the rules. I tried to blame everything else. Obviously, some of the abuse and all of that had something to do with it. But that was the first day he actually looked at me and said, son, I do love you. See, the Amish don't use in their Dutch, it's a Low German dialect. They don't use love in their vocabulary. So it's way too sexual to hug or to say, I love you. That's a worldly sexual word. But that day when he said that, anyway, I knew that he was sorry, that he felt bad, that what had happened to me and all that he had put me through. And that is actually really when our relationship began, because we secretly started, because he was still drinking. He was still kind of an alcoholic, and I would pick him up, and I didn't care if he was an alcoholic. I didn't care if he was drunk, because I was starting drinking myself at that time, because I was not Amish anymore. So me and him started like secretly having a father-son relationship off and on when mom and the church didn't know about it.
Wow. So yeah, that must have been such a surreal feeling to your relationship to start as you're kind of leaving that world. What was your relationship like with your dad at that time? Like when you would catch up and he'd be drunk and and you were out. Was it good, or was it did you still have problems, or?
No, we actually didn't even discuss those bad days when it was bad. We discussed the good days, because when my dad was being shunned by the Amish church, he would always go to work, drink, and get drunk. And my mom didn't like us brothers working with him for that very reason. But I would always bring up, hey, Dad, remember when we did this and we broke some Amish rules together? And we would talk about that and laugh and giggle and joke. Yeah, the bishop didn't know we did that. And I could go into a few stories on some of the things. One time he was drunk and took me on a plane ride and talked this English person into giving me and him an airplane ride. And the church had no idea. And so
That's so good.
One time he figured out how to start up a dirt bike, and he rode this dirt bike and crashed it and wrecked it, and he had to make it right with me. So there was some heavy moments, and we would talk about these moments. But I got into some heavy drinking at that time, and me and him drank together. And of course, sometimes mom and my older brothers would discuss, hey, why is he missing so late in the evenings? And they started wondering where he's at. So there was some periods where I didn't hear from him for a while. But overall, I would say that was the first time that me and my dad actually had a relationship to where I didn't have that like fear. All of my life growing up, I didn't know when he was going to snap. I didn't know when it was going to be brutal, maybe a beating. And so now all at once, I felt more like loved. I felt more secure around him without fearing him. And so everything started clicking up to 5 years, because I left in 1998. And by 2003, he had a back injury to where he stayed home on Sundays, and he told me about that. So I would go out there. I had already met my wife on the picture here. And so my wife would go out with me, and I'm glad she got to meet my father. And we was just having a good time. And then mom kind of suspected something and started leaving my younger brother at home on a Sunday when she went to church, and that kind of ruined it. So she started sneaking out of the house, and we started having a very good relationship. And then one day he said, I think I'm going to leave the Amish like you did. And I thought, wow, are you serious? He said, yeah, I think I'm going to leave the Amish like you did. And I just thought, well, it's just me. I'm just one son, and he's got all the other siblings and mom. I didn't really want to believe it at first, but I thought, man, boy, that'd be pretty cool. And I also thought, well, he is a severe alcoholic. That might be a problem. I probably have my hands full, but I was willing to overlook all of that to just have a relationship with my father. I didn't really care how brutal it might be, how drunk he might be, but I was willing to have my father and have a relationship with him. So he set a date. He set a date, and he said, this Sunday, and I believe it was be June 23rd, 2003. It was 5 years after I left the Amish. And so on Saturday, 24 hours before I was supposed to pick him up, I'm all excited. My wife's excited. And we were in a local town called Lima, Ohio, and we were getting ready to get a bigger vehicle, like an SUV with a third row seat, because I wanted to make sure that I have a big enough vehicle to get Dad where he needs to go, and my wife can get him, help him get a job and get him to point A to point B, because he didn't have no license or nothing like that. So we are there at that car dealership trying to make a deal, and I get a phone call, and it was the most horrible news of my entire life. I got the news that my dad had took his own life. And I remember they said that the English people called 911 when they found him, when he shot himself. And they called 911, and there was a helicopter that had airlifted him. And I remember I was right there in Lima by St. Rita's Medical Center, and it was only a few blocks away where the car dealership was. And I remember looking up, and I saw the helicopter landing. And I just knew that that was him. So I rushed over, and I got there before any Amish people got there, and I signed paperwork to do brain surgery, because he was still alive, to do brain surgery to remove. But the doctor, I told the doctor to be honest with me, and he was honest. He said, he's pretty well brain dead already. So there's just it's probably a barely a 5% chance that, he would pull through. So when they found him, he was alive with obviously a really bad injury, but they discussed how he was praying, and he was, saying, "Hey, Lord, I'm so sorry what I've done all of my life." He was confessing everything. But even though he did that, the Amish really felt like this is an unforgivable sin, I guess, because he did end his own life, that they still... Go ahead.
So did he shoot himself and then was praying after he shot himself? Like he was still conscious?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because the Amish don't have phones, so it took a lot longer to get the ambulance and all of that you call 911. So because of that, they literally, the rest of my family, I know I talked to two brothers that were on the scene, and just some of the stuff they described, I'm not even going to discuss on here, but
yeah,
what stands out to me is how he was praying, and they heard him pray, and he was literally confessing everything to Christ. He was confessing that he was wrong. He was confessing that he's a sinner. And he even asked God for forgiveness for what he had just done to his own brain. So they hear him praying that, that he's just really sorrowful and was feeling bad. But looking back, I will say this. I think my father was very, very confused. Do I go after Eli Yoder, my only son that is not Amish? Because I love all the other 10 siblings too. It had to have been very confusing.
Yeah.
Do I go with my only son that's not Amish, and I figured he would, because he sounded like he was going to, because he wanted to be free. He wanted to be free from the depression and all of that. And he knew if he came with me, I would let him drink. He's free to do whatever. So I thought that would be enough, but I guess, he just, maybe confusion. Over the years, I've obviously struggled with, wow, wonder if he would have done that if I didn't offer. Maybe me offering that to help him out, maybe that caused, but I stopped blaming myself. I'm not going to go there, because it was just one of those things that for many years I couldn't figure it out. And I used to sit out there. That's really when I became a severe alcoholic at that time, because I used to buy cases of beer and just sit out there, lean up on my dad's tombstone and dump a whole bunch of beer down into the ground. And I'd sit there and just drink. I remember one night my wife and her friend was both with me, and they were bawling and walking away, and they got in the car and left. And I'm sitting there at the graveyard just crying and drinking with my dad and talking to my dad. And afterwards, what stands out to me is my wife said, me and my friend left because we can't watch you hurting like that. And I thought, I was having a good time partying with my dad. She goes, "No, you don't understand. You need counseling. You need help. We can't see you like this." And then I realized I was hurting my wife through that. And I thought, man, I don't want to do what my dad did. But it was at that time, it was my only way of trying to cope with the pain of trying to understand and make sense of why this unfolded the way it did.
Wow. That's so that's incredible. Do you remember the moment that your father actually passed? Was it in a were you there when he passed, or was he already dead when you arrived? Um,
Yeah, he was still alive when I arrived and signed the paperwork, and then they obviously put that life support machine on him, which kept his body alive, but
mhm.
he became brain dead.
Yeah.
So that allowed all, the word spread, and all the Amish started showing up. The Amish family started showing up, and here I'm there first, but
Hmm.
but still they all started showing up, and I'm I don't have Amish clothes on at that time. So what does my mom, what does her dad, the bishop, and everybody else? Oh, Eli, you're going to have to go get some Amish clothes or something. It's like, really? So I had to go get some other clothes on to please them. And then I also asked her, I said, now I signed the paperwork to do brain surgery on my dad. And, because, I'm trying to save his life.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we really don't, we wouldn't have signed that. We give it to God again. We leave that in God's hands. We would not sign that paperwork. But since you're not Amish, that was up to you. So she didn't really condemn me for signing to do brain surgery right away. But she immediately dives in to tell me I should be wearing some Amish clothes. So I went and did that just to make her happy. And I came back. And then a few days later, when enough of the Amish family was there, they decided to take him off of life support. And I remember as they were explaining that they're going to take the life support off of my father, they said the beeping sound is going to go straight and then you're going to know that, that's it. And I remember I was standing there and I had hold of my dad's hand, and my mom, she's standing right next to me, and she said, he might be able to hear you. How about you right now make it right with your dad and apologize for leaving the Amish religion, because he might have
Oh,
done this because so she goes down the blame game road. And I just looked
oof.
over my shoulder and I looked at my Amish mother and I said, you know what? I have nothing to apologize to him for, but I think the Amish do. And she
Wow.
didn't know what to say.
Wow. That's great. I'm glad you did that. That's good. Um, wow. I tell you what, Eli, you need to write a book. I hope you'll be considering it, because it's an amazing it's amazing, powerful story. And yeah, eventually, so you're a Christian now. So eventually, when you left the Amish, did you still consider yourself some sort of a Christian? Or did you believe in God, or were you like not were you an atheist or anything like that? Or um
Yeah, I obviously would probably be the closest to atheist if I describe it, because I was so angry, so bitter, that I ran from all religion, all Christianity. If anybody mentioned anything about the Bible, God, Jesus, religion, I ran the other way.
yeah.
Um, I was at the point in my life where I had such a wound that I was going to do whatever I thought would please me. And I thought running after alcohol, you name it, I did it all. I mean, I ended up
Hmm.
getting arrested. I did some crack cocaine. I did some drugs. I just went on a path of, well, I'm not Amish. They told me I'm going to hell. So I'm just going to have a little bit of fun before I go to hell then. That was my mindset.
Mm,
That's how I was thinking at that time. And I
yeah.
couldn't undo that for a long time. For 19 straight years after I left the Amish, I never picked up a Bible. I was a mess. I got down to where I had a bankruptcy by 2013, and I was left with nothing. And then God started working on me a little bit. And by 2017, I got to where I kind of had this notion of, I'm going to go back Amish, because I had been to the end of myself. Everything I indulged in, you know, women, sex, booze, everything that I indulged in, I still felt empty. I still came up to where I was like, I'm still not at peace. What do I do? I'm just going to go Amish. Maybe I'll be happy to, being Amish, because I was told that I could get to heaven and please God. That'll certainly bring me peace. And then one of my cousins that had left the Amish, he said, make me a promise. I said, yeah, what is it? He said, will you read one of those English Bibles, not the Martin Luther German stuff? He said, will you read one of those English Bibles And, you know, I was kind of angry that he said that, but I was like, okay, I'll promise you right now, because when I read it, I'm going to show you exactly when I get to it that you must be Amish because they taught us that. And I'm certainly going to come across to where it says you got to be Amish. And, and praise God, that's what it took. I'm glad my cousin said that, because I went into the Bible and I went through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and in the book of John, I got saved because I was reading where Jesus is the only way. He's the one that saves us when we believe and have faith in that. And I just kept I just kept thinking, where am I finally going to find this Amish stuff that I was taught? Where is it at? And I'm not finding it. And then, of course, the ordinance that they were keeping with all the rules, I found that in Colossians 2:14, where it says, blotting out the handwritings of ordinances which were against us, contrary to us, nailing it to the cross. And I'm thinking, I'm about to go Amish, I thought, and I was going to keep the ordinance and be Amish. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that just said it's nailed to the cross. So again, God was showing me that Jesus was enough. Jesus finished it. I can follow him without being Amish, without being religious. And that, praise God, is when I was set free.
Wow. That's incredible. There was a question I was going to ask about that. I just forgot, lost my train of thought. Oh, yes, that's right. Sorry. Were you with your wife this entire time when you went through? Like, how long have you been with your wife?
We've been together, be 21 years since we met. So
Wow.
I met her just maybe 6 to 8 months before that happened to my father. So my wife was with me in the hospital. She was with me through thick and thin. We really actually connected and got very close during that time because she was there for me as this all was playing out. And I'm so glad and so blessed that she was able to meet my dad. And she always says how my father was just such the nicest, always friendly, kind, smiling. She loved my dad. And he was the only one in the family that he said, Eli, I don't care what the church rules are and what mom's rules are, because her dad was the bishop, so she was very strict. He said, especially when he was drunk, he'd say this. He said, you pull that car right on in this driveway, I'll stand right there and talk with you. Screw that bishop, he said.
So was your wife, did she go through a similar, if you don't mind me asking, and if this is if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but is she have a similar faith journey to you? Does she have Christian beliefs at the moment? Did she always have Christian beliefs?
No, not necessarily. She would say she was a believer, that during that time, her family, obviously they prayed and they said there is a God. So they were not atheists, but she didn't necessarily completely understand salvation. You know, they never really had any Bible studies, but once I did come to the knowledge of the truth, I started sharing that with her and educating her. And so here at the house, you know, we try to have Bible studies and we all get to know what the Word of God says without anything else in the way, you know, without church or religion or any pastor, anything else trying to tell us something that is not in the Bible. Because that's why I'm actually passionate about the Word of God now, is because it's enough for me without having any religious additives.
Cool. Do you attend a church, or do you just mainly do those Bible studies?
Yeah, 2 miles from my house here, we have a local church, and it is a non-denominational church because I will only allow those non-denominationals that teach the Bible and want to teach others. And I have no use for any denomination that have, well, we've done this for this many years. See, since I come from where I come from, I have no use for tradition. I have no use for anything that is being practiced that is not found in Scripture.
Wow, interesting. Does your church or doctrine that you subscribe to, and excuse me if this is off topic, but do you believe in like speaking in tongues or laying on of hands, things like that? Or do you think that was for a time?
Well, I do never discredit what God can do. God can do anything and all things. Now, I have not been gifted by the Holy Spirit to speak in tongues, but I can tell you that I have been to a few churches. I've been asked to preach and share my testimony where I literally knew that it was the Holy Spirit in a person praying and speaking in tongues is something I couldn't understand. At first, because I come from the Amish, I wanted to doubt that, but I rephrased and repented from thinking that way, because I know God can, the Bible talks about we all, as members of the body of Christ, we're all gifted. And if we know those gifts, the parable about the talents, we should not bury our talents. We should use them. I'm talented with preaching and sharing the word of God, and that's what I do. But I'm not gifted with speaking in tongues, but I will not discredit someone when I see somebody speaking in tongues, because I know that the Bible makes it very clear some can be gifted to do that.
Cool. I'm not a Christian myself or a religious person, but I do appreciate your story, and appreciate that you took the time to come on to this channel to tell it. I was hoping that we could move into some more questions and answers, but first I do want to shout out a few things. So first thing I want to shout out is your TikTok. People, you need to go. So you need to go to this TikTok, and it's going to ask me to do this again. It's so annoying. You need to go to this TikTok. There is just hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands. No, probably not, but hundreds of videos of you just answering every question about the Amish. It's it's amazing. It's really good content, and it's fascinating. Fascinating stuff, and you're getting a lot of views, which is really cool. You're getting really popular. And the second thing we wanted to mention, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, but you're part of Amish Rescue, Rescue Mission, and it started by putting up these posters, which taught kids in the Amish community about what safe touch is and what not safe touch is. So, and you actually had a story about how these billboards were put up next to a school that was part of a really dangerous Amish community, and then the school put up barriers, or the church or something put up barriers and then moved the building. Is that right? Can you maybe you can tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah. It was a former Amish girl by the name of Rachel that started Amish Rescue Mission and made that poster, safe touch, not safe touch, because we didn't have sex education. So she was showing the red spots. So we used a lot of that to get that out there, to show these young Amish girls and boys this information, since they didn't have that. But yes, what you were talking about there would have been in Ohio, Eastern Ohio, where we put up a billboard for Amish Rescue Mission, our hotline numbers on there, a little bit of scripture from the Bible, and how they can be rescued, and also the safe touch, not safe touch. And we even had on that billboard sign about, you are the boss of your body. And the reason we installed that Amish Rescue Mission billboard there is because of what we were hearing. It is the most dangerous Amish community in the world, because of the bishop and how he strayed away from other Amish and didn't want anything to do with other Amish churches when they came and tried to reason with him, tried to get him to change his ways. He's very rich, so he always just told them to leave. He wants nothing to do with them. So when we put this Amish Rescue Mission sign up, he found us as a threat. And he got very, very angry. And so what he did was, he goes and puts this big orange fence up, because this billboard sign that you're showing right now is diagonal from the Amish school. And he did not want to have any of the children, the young boys, young girls, victims, to see this information and call us to be rescued. Because the stories we kept hearing from this Amish community was that he was even taking other men's wives from them, because he would claim to be like the prophet Moses, like the prophet Elijah in the world, in the Bible, or Isaiah. And because of his teaching, many people fell for it. Many people believed he was a true prophet and that he was hearing directly from God. So even some testimonies we were hearing where men felt like it was an honor to give their wives to him to have children with. So those kind of gruesome stories that we were hearing coming out of this community resulted in us wanting to desperately put up this billboard sign. And of course, he's obviously very angry about that, because there's a few former Amish that ended up getting out of the community and then reached out to us and said, he has literally fathered over 50 plus children with many different men's wives in that community.
Wow. They on Amish Rescue Mission's website, they have a statement at the start that says survivors will no longer be silent on incest, rape, victim blaming, human trafficking, intimidation, bestiality, grooming, kidnapping, spiritual, physical, mental, and verbal abuse. And I love that. And it's in all caps. It's like this, enough's enough. And I love that. And so you're involved in that. You're part of the group that does that now.
Yes. Yeah, we have our hotline, 888-621-1985 for anybody that needs rescued in these communities. We put that out there. And then anybody that we always recommend getting on our website to see, like you just read, all the information's on there. It's the www.amishrescuemission.org. And you can actually, anybody can support us and our mission by going on our website. And there's even a donate button on there, because what we do is, when somebody needs rescued, we have to send out drivers. We have volunteers as taxi drivers to go out into these Amish communities. Several of them that we have picked up, it took 3 drivers to get them from one state to like 2 or 3 states over where our safe house was. And so it takes gas, and we want to be able to make sure we reimburse all of these drivers. So it's not a cheap mission. It does cost money. We do need funding. So we always like to give that website out, www.amishrescuemission.org. That way people can help us and support our mission, because we cannot do it if we didn't have people already help us. We got so many people, awesome people that have volunteered to help us. If it's, safe houses where the former Amish are reaching out and saying, hey, you know what? My house is open. I got an extra room. If you have anybody that's being abused and they reach out, we want to help them get jobs. We want to make sure they're safe. And I think it's just been amazing how fast it took off, really, because we didn't think when we first started it that there'd be that much support, that much outreach, but yet it's just been taken off like crazy. And now we have hundreds of safe houses all over the place, really.
Wow. Do you have any stories of like Amish people that you've helped get out? Like, do you have any like stories that stick with you?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind would be Hannah. Hannah was adopted from the non-Amish world, and her adoptive Amish father wanted to adopt. We know now, adopt for all the wrong reasons, to fulfill his sexual desires. So she was molested and raped at a very young age, because some of these Amish stories that are coming out now, they adopt, I think, for just the wrong reasons. And she was even chained down. She was molested. She was raped. And then she was able to reach out to a former Amish that called me and got the ball rolling. We got her out of there and got her. She needed counseling. We got her into a couple different places where we were able to give her a safe house. We don't let the Amish know where they're at. We don't never leak that information out. We don't tell them where they're at, which state, because the Amish are known to come after them to try to get them to come back. And then Wayne is another one. He got a hold of me and he said, I really got to get out of there. And he told me he was of age, 18, so I could legally get him out of there. And we used 3 different drivers to get him out. And, just the stuff he was sharing, beatings, kind of like what I endured, physical abuse, sexual abuse, just all of this gruesome stuff. And that is when it's worth it, when we were able to successfully get some of these young men and women out of the community and get them far away from the mess that they were in.
Eli, I'm blown away by what you and Amish Rescue Mission are doing. I take my hat off to you guys. It's incredible. I'm glad I could give you my small podcast platform to spread the message a little bit. We mentioned before stream that it's not all Amish. You still have friends that are in the Amish community that it's safe and fine. Do you see this? I do want to jump into some questions. Do you see there's anything inherently wrong with the Amish way of life?
Yes, in the very conservative or the secretive groups, I call it, because they keep crimes. They say the church must take care, God's church, they call it, must take care of those crimes. There's no mandated reporting. They won't report those crimes to law enforcement. They have no ties with the government. Those are the ones that are the biggest problems. Now, some of the more liberal New Order, I call it, they have what's called mandated reporting, and they hold people accountable. Now they actually support us. And we've actually gotten phone calls from some of them, and they said, hey, look, we're willing to work with you. And if you rescue somebody that loves to be Amish and wants to stay Amish, we want to take them in and be an Amish safe house. And we're like, what? You're willing to work with us and you're Amish? So it just shows you the difference. And there's a lot of good Amish people out there. They good-hearted, loving people, and they hate evil just as much as we do. And they stepped up and they said, we're willing to work with you. So thank God for that. That was such a blessing that they were willing to work with us. And if some of these youngsters that are being abused, if they feel uncomfortable to live a worldly life, because they are also taught the way I was, that they would go to hell if they left. So now we can offer a Amish safe house that can keep them in the Amish and still go to the Amish church if they want to. But I would say the old order, very conservative ones, those are the ones that hide these crimes and hide these abusive, incest, bestiality, animal sex. A lot of those things are coming out of the old order strict communities.
It's good. I think there's not much good can come from secrets, and I think when you have a secret society, secret group, I think that you have to ask why there are secrets. So I think it's good that there's some communities out there like that. I have some questions from the audience. Someone, first of all, Aunt Jo said, "I'd watch that movie, Becoming English, the Eli Yoda story." So you might have a movie about you one day. That'd be great. So D said, I heard that education is just through grade 8, keeping away from worldly subjects that would a typical child study. Is it mostly religion?
Yeah, 8th grade is only, we were all actually New Order and Old Order Amish all keep that tradition. You only go to 8th grade. Now, again, I'll go to the strict ones where I'm from. By not educating you properly, we didn't know a lot of things. We didn't know the dangers of things. I didn't know the history. I didn't know all of these other nations, Australia, Germany, mention all those other countries outside the United States. I was never taught those things. We only went to 8th grade. We just learned about Amish stuff. We just learned about construction, how to build a house, how to build a barn, and just the
So
basics.
I'm imagining you don't also learn, you don't get taught evolution or quantum mechanics in Amish schools. No. Yeah. I mean, that's in probably where you're from. It's probably doesn't get taught much at all anyway.
Right.
But yeah, if you're in the Bible Belt, right? Is that, I don't know the US very well. Is Ohio in the Bible Belt or is it not in the Bible Belt?
I'm not sure about the Bible Belt, but Ohio would be about the center, like northern. Just above us would be Michigan, and then you got Canada. So we're like in the northern part of it.
Oh, okay. All right, I was mistaken, but okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so is it mainly just Amish stuff? Do you don't learn history or science and things like that?
Some of them do. If it is, it's very little. I remember we were taught about like the United States, and we had to try to memorize every state. We live in Ohio, so like Virginia, West Virginia, Michigan, all the states. So they taught us a little bit about our country, but civil wars, World War I, World War II, how big, the round ball, the Earth with all these other. I didn't know none of those things. So when I left, I was like, wow, the world is so big.
Wow. So did you think that the Earth was flat at that time when you were in the Amish?
Oh, yeah. The whole time growing up, I thought it was definitely flat.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you believe it's flat now or do you believe it's a globe now?
No, it's a round ball.
Okay. Hey, you have to ask these days. There's a big flat Earth community online. Okay. So some more questions. Just scrolling back up. Were batteries allowed? I imagine not. For clocks and such.
In our community, the batteries were not allowed. Some of the New Order Amish have batteries, flashlights, and under their buggy to have brighter lights on their buggies. But obviously, the strict ones, they do not allow batteries.
Can you talk about the notorious Amish food?
Some German names for that stuff. But I will describe our favorite meal. That was called the haystack, and it was about 20 to 30 different items. Obviously, the Amish are known for their good, delicious food because everything is homemade. They live off the land. They got their own vegetables. They can everything. They got their own meat. There's no preservatives in it. There's no garbage pumped into it. No antibiotics pumped into it through the cattle. It's all homegrown. I guess you could call it organic. And so some of their meals and their dishes are just delicious. In this haystack, you could add meat, vegetables, salad kind of stuff, anything you want. You can reach into that table and pile it onto your plate until it's so tall it looks like a haystack. That was my favorite meal.
Wow. So they asked, what did you think about when you discovered Google?
I was pretty amazed by that. I thought, wow, Google is much smarter than the Amish.
Did you and this like, if you don't want to go here, that's totally cool. But do you remember when you first discovered, like, obviously, when I was 12 years old, I was on the internet and I would, you'd see pop-ups for pornography and things like that. When you first experienced that, that would have been when you left the Amish. Were you just like, what is this? Were you blown away when you first saw like adult material like that? Or was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually kind of overwhelming, to be honest with you, because a couple of my buddies, that they could tell you some stories that they'll never forget. They laugh and joke still to this day about it, because they went and rented a porno movie, a VCR, and they put it into the VCR, and they didn't say nothing to me. They just sit back. I was drinking at the time. I left the Amish, and I'm just living how I wanted to anyway. And I'm just sitting there, and they plug it in, and they're just quiet, and they're watching. Now it comes on, and they're just watching my reaction. I'm just like, what's going on? And of course, as you can imagine, for the icing on the cake for them, they next put in a homosexuality video where it's like the same.
Yeah. And that would have made even more confused. Yeah.
I have not done TikToks on that, but that was one of the highlights that they were having fun with me.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's wild what people you can access like online now. Like, you think about like 50 years ago, you'd never see some of the stuff that you can at your fingertips you could see. So I wonder how that's going to affect society. I don't know. It's probably a bad thing, but I don't know. It's going to be an interesting world in 100 years.
When they asked me, I remember they were talking about the word gay, homosexual, and I remember I was like, I didn't want to look stupid, but I was like, okay, what is that? And so they had to explain
I'm gay.
that.
Yeah, I'm gay.
we didn't have stuff like that. We didn't have any same-sex stuff. So when they were asking me about that kind of stuff, I'm just like, and then they'd talk about the women's time of the month and all of that. I didn't even know what that was. I was never taught. Wow. I was a guy, so I didn't even know that women have that time of the month, and they're trying to explain that to me. It was just so much that I had to learn.
Was it? Once again, I'm getting very personal, but feel free to not answer this. But when you first started engaging in sexual activities and stuff, was that like a hard thing for you to, like? I guess it's for us growing up. For me, growing up as a teenager, all us boys would talk about it and stuff, and we would see pornography when I'm 15, 16 and stuff, and we get ideas from that. But with no sexual education, like, how did your first sexual experiences, were they a disaster, or were they like something that you had to work through? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it was. I wasn't educated in that. So my first thing, I remember I was dating my first girl, and just a couple days into it, I said something to her about, we should just go get married so that we can have sex. And I remember she looked at me and she, married? And I'm doing the Amish thing, and I said, well, don't we have to get married to have sex? And she said, no. and I just remember how stunned she was that I wanted to get married, because I thought there was no way I can kiss her. I can't touch her. I can't see her naked until we're married. That was my understanding. So obviously she had a lot of breaking in to do when it came to that.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, Eli, it's been absolutely amazing having you on. I just wanted to, before we jump off, make sure you go check out Eli's TikTok. Make sure you check out Amish Rescue Mission and see all the cool stuff they're doing. Absolutely awesome. And for those who are new to Deep Drinks podcast, here the guest chooses their favorite drink and we drink it together. And coming up, we have some fun episodes. We have Purity Culture Horror Stories with Feral Pastor's Wife, which will be really fun. And then we have the Q&A special with Derek Lambert, the Derek Knows Everything Christmas special, which is going to be, he talks to a lot of Bible scholars and scholars of religion, and we're going to be asking him all the questions throughout the year. So that's going to be fun as well. But make sure you go over to Eli's TikTok and also Amish Rescue Mission and donate if you can and help support them in any which way you can. I've just got one last question that someone's asked. Have you considered partnering with RAIN? RAIN is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network.
I have not heard of that. I wasn't aware about RAIN. Is that like an organization or?
I think so. RAIN might be able to help them reach more people, and ARM can fill in the gaps where RAIN is missing. It must be, yeah, maybe it's something to look into. I'm sure, I'm sure it's good. Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. Okay, it might be something that you can pass on to the good folks at Amish Rescue Mission, and maybe it's something that you can call partnership. But thanks everyone for tuning out. Eli, is there anything else you wanted to say before we leave?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, thank you very much for having me on, because I love to make awareness, and any kind of awareness like this where we can get the word out there. And my biggest desire is to help those, my people, the Amish. You know, we, just because of what I went through, I don't hate them. I'm not bitter at them. I love them enough to where I wish all of them would be willing to work with Amish Rescue Mission, because we want to help those that can't help themselves and give a voice to those that were silenced. And I just wish that there was more help out there to help those, especially in the very strict communities, where we could literally help them to freedom and get them to heal, because I know how much healing I had to do. And it's a process. It's like layer after layer that you got to peel off. So I know there's a lot more cases. There's only a few that we know of, and I know there's a lot more cases out there that we don't know of. And that is why I appreciate podcasts like you here to have us on and try to make awareness and talk about it. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Aunt Jo said that they're going to message you on TikTok about RAIN, so maybe they've got a contact there. But thank you so much, Eli, for coming on. I'll play the outro and I'll see you in the back room. But thanks, everyone. See ya.
All right. Thank you.